Hi folks, this is all the fruit, and today I'm foraging in the beautiful city of Heidelberg in Germany. It's Easter, the end of March, and this was historically quite a, no, not quite a, but a very lean, meager and hungry time in Europe. Right now I could joke, well, let's see what I can forage to survive in this not so good fruit foraging month, but in previous centuries this was usually the time where people would die, like around the time of February, March, they would starve, die of scurvy or other diseases, or freeze to death and so on. Fortunately, I've never encountered those times. But even when I was, well, younger, like in the 90s, usually this part of Germany we would have very mild winters, except for some harsh frosts in November. But then around March or April, when you thought, okay, the winter was mild and now the spring will be like summer, we usually got hit with a late frost, which would, yeah, everything would look more or less like this, already starting to flower, and then we would get hit with a very harsh frost, so harsh that you couldn't even forage properly for roots and tubers. Well, on the other hand, 4 years ago when I started doing my videos, we had 2 years which were really great. A combination of different climatic factors during the 2 previous years basically meant that we would have a lot of fruits throughout the winter and even into spring. And I thought that because of climate change this would become the norm around here. Well, it didn't. This winter was quite harsh, as I could see by some indicators here in nature, which I'll try to show to you during the foraging video. Now spring is, yeah, it changes between 10 and 20 degrees daily temperature. Not many fruits, so we'll see what else we can forage around here. One plant you will notice pretty much at every time of year in German parks, but it's never as abundant or it's never as obvious as in spring, is the daisy. Now it's a rainy day, so the daisies have closed or half closed their flowers. However, the flower and every other part is edible. A bit aromatic. This one is also a bit astringent and strange and has a mouth-watering taste in a bad sense. Somebody tried to argue with me that mouth-watering is always good. No, sometimes your mouth just tries to produce enough spit so that you can flush out every molecule of some food. This is what my mouth does right now. Why? Well, March and April are also traditionally a drought time in Germany. Yeah, you can have drought and very cold temperatures at the same time. Although in the last 20 years usually it was drought and pretty hot temperatures in March, April, which means that the traditional stuff you could forage, all the leaves and flowers, a lot of them get bitter, astringent or other horrible taste quite early. I was surprised how badly my mouth reacted to this daisy. Let's try another one. A bit better, but still not good. This is, I think, despite me doing a lot of foraging, I'm still a spoiled, modern, Western first world person. And so I'm used to like tender but not very strong tasting salads. So basically, yeah, a lot of plants just taste too bad for me or are too tough or provoke negative reactions in my body. some traditional foraging culture of thousands of years ago would totally be able to eat so many things which my body would find revolting. So probably they would be totally fine with the daisies, and I've noticed that a lot of greens nowadays, people can enjoy them only for 2 to 3 weeks during the year, but more traditional societies, they could have eaten them for months, even when they are more tough, more bitter, more astringent. Yeah, pity. You would think that after decades of foraging I'm conditioned to such stuff, but no, not really. A dock, a close relative of the sorrel. Well, know your docks and sorrels, because some of them are tasty and edible, though they contain quite a lot of oxalate. Some are bitter and non-edible. There are a lot of bitter tastes which you should really avoid. This is Rumex obtusifolius, the blunt dock. It's bitter, stay away from it. A plant that looks like dock is the plantain, Plantago. This is Plantago media. Maybe I shouldn't try it because some bird pooped on it. Here we have some Plantago major, quite a puny plant, so it could be Plantago major subspecies intermedia. It's also called Plantago intermedia. Yeah, botany is a little bit confusing here. Plantago media and Plantago intermedia growing right next to each other. No bird poo on this one. Quite tough. And with the flavor of mushrooms. Let's take the third common plantain around here, Plantago lanceolata. Plantains often, well, the leaves might look small, but they often grow in giant amounts on meadows and can be foraged while the grass is not very high yet. They taste of mushrooms and can be cooked, but yeah, I can totally taste that there was maybe not a drought, but a dry season, well, a couple dry weeks here before I arrived, because everything tastes kinda tough, bitter and astringent. The invasive Indian strawberry, Duchesnia indica. Yeah, this thing can deal with quite harsh, well, with the milder climates in Germany. It started spreading here only the climate after the climate change. But I've also seen it on the Canary Islands or even in Borneo. I don't know if it's potentially invasive in subtropical and tropical areas, but a plant that can survive in many places, is invasive in many places, and the fruits are not even edible or tasty. Ranunculus ficaria or Ficaria verna. This is a plant in the toxic family Ranunculaceae and still a very important survival plant. In Germany, it's called the scurvy wheat. Not because you get scurvy when you eat it, but because it was the first green vitamin C rich thing in many areas, which people would eat in spring, where they already were showing scurvy symptoms because they had nothing but bread and smoked meat to eat for the last weeks or months. This would save them from scurvy, but if you eat too much of it, as I said, it's in the Ranunculaceae, it's poisonous. Actually, there is another edible use for it. Let's see. Well, here you can see pieces of a couple of the little tubers. Let's try and find a better tuber. Okay, let's rip out some more. Nope, nothing yet. Well, anyways, here I think you can see a tuber, this white thing. After floods, those tiny tubers, the size of rice grains, would sometimes accumulate at the banks of lakes, rivers and creeks, and people would collect them. The tubers are kind of starchy, so since those were quite lean times, this was a bit of very welcome starch in spring. Glechoma hedaracea. A plant of which I again don't know the English name. You can put it in the comments. Put all the English names with some timestamps if you have time. It's also edible, but it's very spicy. I would rather use it in moderation as a spice than in big amounts as a salad. Lamium, the Germans call this death nettle. Not death like in dying, but death like in not hearing, because it has no spines. Yeah, that's German logic. It's kind of edible, but also kind of spicy. It's related to glechoma, that's why they look pretty similar. You can actually even suck nectar out of those little tubular flowers, but I usually don't manage to do it. You can eat it, but it's spicy. Horse chestnuts or conkers lying around. Those are not edible. You can use them as fish poison, medicine, or to make explosives, or make different poisons. I think somewhere I also read or saw people feed them to the pigs, but I'm not sure if they are good for the pigs, so don't give them to your pigs just because I said. Maybe check first. A pig basically eats everything a human eats, and a human eats everything a pig eats, but a modern human is a lot more spoiled than a modern pig, so there is a chance pigs could eat them despite the high saponin content, but maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe someone can check it and put it in the comments. When it comes to popular ornamental flowers, some are edible, some will kill you. Muscari, I'm not sure if this is edible raw, maybe you can check it. I've done too much with fruits in the last years, I've forgotten pretty much everything about other edible plants. Well, this is usually not being eaten in Europe. However, the Italians collect the little bulbs, they look like tiny silver onions, and pickle them. And then they taste like onions without the onion taste. If you have eaten those tiny white pickled onions, imagine tiny white pickled onions without the onion taste. This grows a lot in fields, so you can, after you plow, you can collect it and pickle it in huge amounts. However, I don't know if any of the raw parts of this plant are actually edible. Another popular ornamental flower which is edible are tulips. And actually the old Dutch people still remember how they had nothing else to eat but tulip bulbs during World War II. And they didn't like them a lot. I think even the flowers are edible, but I'm not sure. The Dutch usually eat the bulbs, which of course have a lot more bulk. Although they don't have a lot of nutrients. Also their taste is not great, and I think they are also not too good for you. They give you diarrhea or something like that. They don't think fondly of eating those tulips, and I think nowadays, except for some cases of nostalgia and foraging, people in the Netherlands don't eat the bulbs anymore. If you have ever eaten tulip bulbs, please tell me what it is like. Oh, among the tulips there is something people call daffodil in English. In German they call it Narcisse, which is more correctly because the Latin name is Narcissus. While there is another plant called aphrodil, and confusing aphrodil with daffodil can be a problem, especially when one of them is edible and one is not. Well, this daffodil is not edible. It's toxic, and not toxic like in it will make you feel a little bit bad, but toxic like in it will make you feel horribly bad or even kill you. Well, here is a big daffodil variety or species which is not flowering anymore with bluish leaves. Here is another one hidden in the grass with greenish leaves and small yellow flowers. Daffodils usually flower a little bit before the tulips, so here you can see the tulips are in flower now, and the daffodils have already finished. Don't eat daffodils, folks. Don't even try a little bit of it. I've never tasted them, but it seems it's really not worth the trouble. It will give you a very bad, possibly deadly experience. This grass here, which likes the more fertilized parts around the flowers and doesn't grow in other parts of the meadow in such big amounts. It also likes the more fertilized areas where the leaf litter accumulates, where the wind blows the leaf litter in winter. Is Bromosterilis. The Germans call it Taubetrespe, which again means deaf, and in this case it means that there is nothing inside the seeds, nothing edible inside the seeds. That's wrong. The seeds are big and edible, but they're often infected with ergot. So even if you are starving, it's basically a Russian roulette whether you want to die of ergot poisoning or die of starvation. That's why in Germany sometimes the seeds were fed to chickens, like with this logic that the chickens, well, if the chickens die, it's sad, but it's not a big tragedy, and if the chickens survive, they will get fattened up and lay eggs. So the risk of killing a chicken was considered not as grave as the risk of killing a person. Oh, here I'm seeing something I hope never to see in this city, but of course it was just a matter of time. Pigs, wild boars have followed here. And here we are, well, not really in the city center, but this is quite a densely populated area. This spring, for the first time, I saw pigs wallowing on the other side, on campus where I'm working. Well, pigs searching for food. I think this is maybe because due to the harsh winter. They like to come into the suburbs, into the outskirts for years, but now they have pressed even deeper into the city. People from Bulgaria or Borneo, where there was a big outbreak of swine flu a couple years ago in Bulgaria and in Borneo, more or less at the same time. They're really envious when they hear how many wild boars are here in Germany. Then I tell them, well, come to Germany. They have a big lack of hunters here. Everybody who can hold the gun, basically, and who can get the expensive and quite demanding test for becoming a hunter can hunt hunters, because we don't want a wild boar infestation in our parks and gardens and trash bins and so on. So yeah, folks, if you like to eat wild boar and know how to shoot, come to Germany. The pigs are free, more or less. Cherry plum, Prunus cerasifera. This is a parent species of the domestic plum. The fruits are totally edible and of quality about as good as domestic plums, or almost as good as domestic plums. The good thing is they don't need care of fertilization. They actually become feral and they're invasive. Here we have an ornamental form where everything is red, including the fruits. You can eat every part as long as it's tender enough and not bitter. Phew. The leaves are tough and bitter. Phew. A trick is usually when in a plant the leaves have become too tough and bitter, eat the flowers. A bit better, but flowering time is over. Yeah, this drought, oh yeah, quite bitter, like bitter almonds. No, too late, don't eat them anymore. This drought, or this year it wasn't even a real drought, but this kind of dry season in spring really messes up foraging. The fruits are not here yet, but the greens become tough and less palatable. Sonus. Germans call it cabbage thistle because it is a bit spiny. It is related to thistles and it's kind of edible. Really find one that I like. It's not too bitter, but it has kind of a funky taste. I arrived here 2 weeks ago. I could still eat violet flowers. Now I don't see flowers anymore. Violet flowers are actually quite good. They are colorful, flavorful and tasty. The leaves are slightly slimy, pretty tough and hairy. But at least I taste no bitterness, so I guess the leaves are also kinda edible. In small amounts, mind you. Pines are great survival plants. From the deepest winter to the hottest summer. Well, in the deepest winter you can basically eat the inner bark. It has quite a lot of calories and tastes quite good. You can eat the leaves or make a tea from the leaves. It will also give you a lot of vitamin C in winter and boost your immune system. It will make you drink more hot water, which is always good in winter. All pine seeds are edible, but in this Pinus nigra, which is not native to this area, it's rather native to southeastern Europe. In this Pinus nigra, the seeds are still quite small. Here you can already see the flowers coming out. Yeah, male flowers produce a lot of pollen, which is edible. Female flowers produce young pine cones, which are edible and can be pickled. And the young branches can actually be eaten. They are nice and sour and tasty, but they will come about in a couple of weeks. Brambles are edible. The leaves make quite a good substitute for tea. Oh, I have to be careful. There are animals living under those brambles. Interesting. I don't think there are rabbits in this area. There are a lot of rabbits in Mannheim, less than 20 kilometers away, but around here we usually don't have rabbits. But those holes are too big for rats. It could be that there are hares here, however the park is a little bit small for hares. But I saw the traces of pigs over there. It's possible that there are wild boars here. They feel quite relaxed as long as nobody comes in those parts of the park. But if you start rustling in their bramble, they might feel cornered and they will either run or attack. I don't want to know which one they'll choose. Well, here are violets. Let's try the flowers. They are quite good. And now the brambles. Of course, the fruits are the main thing you get from the brambles, but not right now. You can make a tea from the leaves, or you can take the young stem. The test is always, feel here, it kind of broke, so there are no fibers in the center, or the pit is not too hard in the center, there are still fibers around it. I peel the fibers away with my teeth and eat the pit inside. It is still. The violet flower also gave me some don't eat me. 2 weeks ago they were still tasty. Now, after just a couple sunny days, everything tastes kinda blah. Except for the bramble, they are still okay. So, it's soft and juicy, a bit sour, not bad, still a bit small. It should be twice as thick and the edible part should be 3 times as long. Chilomayos, a beautiful soft plant, but unfortunately not edible at all. When you break it, you see that it has an orange sap. Stay away from everything that has white or especially yellowish, orangish or reddish milky sap. It's so poisonous, it will eat through your skin. Actually, it's being applied on warts because it can even kill off a whole wart. You use this long enough on warts, your warts will fall off. However, I do not recommend it, and especially I do not recommend to touch it or even eat it. Oregon grape. The fruits are good after preparation. Some people say you can eat them raw, but I wouldn't eat them raw in huge amounts. You'll get diarrhea and a lot of other problems. It seems the flowers are edible. You can make a lemonade out of them, I guess, by soaking them in water. You can also eat them raw, some sources say, but they are bitter. Bitter, but also sour and aromatic. Very aromatic. Well, if they say they are edible but bitter, then the bitterness shouldn't signify a very strong poison content. I would sprinkle a small amount on top of salads or other foods. Bitterness is dominant, but there is still a nice sourness and a very nice flavor in them. Near the Mahonia there is a goji berry. In the 20th century this was a very popular ornamental here, but everybody thought it's poisonous. Now that people eat it, most parks and gardens haven't planted it for decades, so it's become kind of rare outside of fruit gardens. This is one place where it was planted decades ago, and after mild winters you could find a couple goji berries. The fact that I don't see any goji berries could signify that this was quite a harsh winter. Elderberries, or at least elder leaves. Most parts of the plant are toxic. Even the fruits and flowers are a bit toxic. But once the flowers are flowering, you can eat them in pancakes or make drinks out of them. The berries are also good after preparation, not so good raw. But right now at this stage I don't know any edible uses for it. Notice how we haven't found any edible fruits yet. That was 4 or 5 years ago when I made those first winter and spring foraging videos in Germany. I made a video which said you can easily forage 100 fruits in a German spring. Yeah, back then I didn't know that it was the perfect storm. Basically we had heavy rains for 2 years, so all plants had a lot of nutrients. Then we had dry summers for 2 years, so we got good quality fruit from the still strong plants. Those good quality fruit didn't rot during winter, especially since they had a high sugar content and a low water content from the dry summers. And also the winters were very mild, so those fruits didn't freeze. And actually a couple species like Solanum, which are very frost sensitive, and also silver berries were producing new fruits in winter. So yeah, back then you could forage about 100 different fruit trees in the German spring. Now, if I would try really hard, I could find 10 fruits I could forage, and about 3/4 of them, or even more, would actually be nuts or seeds and not entire fruits. That shows you how important the weather of the last weeks, months and even years is for a harvest. Actually the Germans, well, most nations have a word for weather, which is like the weather of the last couple days or weeks, and climate, which is like the climate of the last couple decades, centuries, millennia. The Germans have a third word. It's Witterung. Well, they use Wetter und Klima, like weather and climate. They have a third word, Witterung, which is basically the weather of the last couple months, or 1 or 2, or sometimes if you specify it even up to a couple years. Basically the weather that's important for the present harvest. The weather of the last couple months or the last 1.5 years. A very useful word to have, because, yeah, weather is something really short term, and climate is something really long term. Even climate change usually happens over decades and centuries. This German word Witterung is really good because it really helps you explain the fruit and veggie season and the harvest and and the situation in the vegetation, which mostly depends on the weather of the last 1 to 2 years. Down here I see a lot of huge cherry plum fruits. See them? Those elongated yellowish things. But cherry plums are round and it's a little bit early for big fruits. Yeah, unfortunately those are infected fruits. Forgot the name of the disease, but I don't think they're edible. They become quite big, like over an inch, 2-3 centimeters, even in March. Looks like an early harvest, but it isn't. It's not a harvest at all. Oh, here we see one of the little troughs the people started putting up for the birds in the last couple years. Traditionally, people rather feed birds. That's still happening around here, but climate change means that in the mostly mild winters you don't really need to feed them. But during most of the summer they have quite a lack of water, so giving them water has become a more prominent thing than feeding them. And here a guy from the hospital actually introduced this pretty much everywhere on campus, so now there are lots of people who are putting out those troughs and pans and bowls and giving water to the birds. Not sure if it's so necessary in winter, but yeah, in a dry spring season around this time of year it could already make sense. Not on a day like this, they would have puddles and other stuff to drink from, but there are already enough dry and hot days in spring so that it kinda makes sense already, and it does make even more sense in summer. The light drizzle is getting stronger, so the wise forager flees. Well, the wise forager is waiting for the bus. He can still assess what forageable there is around here. The last orchard on all of the university campus. When I studied here more than 20 years ago, there were a lot more orchards. Actually, the whole area was a big orchard and gardening area before the university came here. This is the last one, and in 1 or 2 years it has to go, unfortunately. Pity, there are even orchids growing in here. Well, you can eat basically all the flowers of the normal fruit trees. Plum, cherry, apple, pear, all the fruit trees here. Usually the rosaceae trees with good edible fruits also have good edible flowers, like ornamental cherries or ornamental apples or ornamental pears. The flowers don't taste as good. I wonder what about the laurel cherry. A lot of people call it cherry laurel because they think it's a laurel that looks like a cherry. No, it's a cherry that looks like a laurel. And actually the fruits and even the seeds are edible to some extent. They are poisonous when unripe or eaten in big amounts. But actually the fully ripe fruits lose most of their cyanide content and are edible. The seeds are being used like bitter almonds. But I wonder what about the flowers. I think they're also being used for aromatizing some things. But bitter. It's the nice bitter almond bitterness. That means don't use them as food. Use them just like bitter almonds in tiny amounts to flavor sweet dishes where you also want this delicious bitter almond flavor, but not too much, because if it becomes too bitter almondy, yeah, the deadly dose is quite easy to obtain. Yeah, so many people wonder why we don't eat grass. There are oxalate crystals in the grass. Basically the grass is infused with glass. Also we lack the gut bacteria to digest it.